Peacemaker. Right now, I'm just doing my top right now. I've just been teaching, going well. All the residents are taking to school. Oh. The weeks, they've been connected the last week. Yeah. No, we need to get it in. Just much there. Okay.
Don't have a seat. The Dharma is vast and subtle. We now have a chance to hear it, study it, and practice it. We vow to realize its true meaning. The Dharma is vast and subtle. We now have a chance to hear it, study it, and practice it. We vow to realize its true meaning. The Dharma is vast and subtle. We now have a chance to hear it, study it, and practice it. We vow to realize its true meaning.
So good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Anyone here for the first time tonight? Eric, welcome, joining us for the week. Anyone else? Tals, welcome back. Oh, hi. What's your name? Hi, Beth. I'm Kozan, in the back. Oh, Skyla? Skylar. And Lark. Are you both local or are you just coming through town? New resident, so I should know that you just arrived. And what about you? Ah, nice. We have an influx of people today as practice period has ended, and we're going into Zen Circle next week. And there's been a lot of coming and going, so it's nice to just settle down together at the end of the day. I'm gonna give a weird talk today. Hope that's okay. It's a little, what is it? It's a little less poetic than usual, maybe. A little more discursive. It comes from emptiness. I got it. Yeah, thank you, Henry. Already one of those talks. So it comes from this kind of moment we're in, which is we've been in practice period. We haven't been paying too much attention to politics, maybe glimpsing here and there. And then we're kind of shot out of a week of silence into what's going on right now. And I'm still trying to figure it out. And this is going to be a little kind of some thoughts on what's going on and how it relates to our practice. It's going to have all sorts of holes in it. And my hope is that it has enough holes in it that it creates good conversation over dinner. So that's kind of the talk we have today. So my question, I think the title was, what is this? Or we could say, what's going on? And just to remind us of some things that have happened in the past 2 weeks. We had the Trump administration threatening to levy 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico. We had hockey games in Canada where people were booing through the national anthem. And all of a sudden, our neighbor was about to become our trade enemy. And then at the last minute, for kind of no reason we can find, it's averted for now. We have Elon Musk, Trump's work husband and fellow billionaire, given the keys to the federal treasury, even though he's not a federal employee. We have most of the employees of USAID being given notice this last week, and rhetoric around it being shut down completely. One of the most successful programs of the federal government, creating stability, saving lives, not at the end of a gun, but at the end of a hypodermic needle. And it's really something. At the same time, we have undocumented residents in this country with this heightened and reasonable fear. ICE agents could be raiding at any moment. And trans citizens in this country facing the loss of access to medical care, access to federal IDs, and other things that citizens are provided. But of course, knowing it's rhetoric or reality is a little murky. We can't tell what's actually being enforced. We have both Greenland and Gaza maybe turning into a US state. I don't know if you saw the other day, but Trump standing next to Netanyahu talking about Gaza becoming the next Riviera of the Middle East. I mean, it's really just, yeah, everyone's smiling. I mean, it's not funny, but we can't help but kind of smile as we hear all this stuff. And yet, when you actually listen to it, you're kind of struck, if you're anything like me, by the sheer callousness of it. That it's like violent in its absurdity, which of course is the point. So what is this? Am I missing any key thing? I missed a lot, but anything people want to call out that's going on right now? Yeah.
The idea that all Palestinians should be gathered up and moved off the Gaza Strip completely.
Right, correct. Yeah. Riviera of the Middle East. Panama, I thought that one had disappeared into the horizon, but apparently still going on. Yes, Gulf of America, Gulf of Fragile Masculinity, I think I saw it called. So, yeah. Okay, so there's a lot of this. So on a rational level, we might call this what the administration's doing bullying. Pretty clear, pretty simple. We've seen it before. And we can read political pundits who help explain the kind of waters we're swimming in. Most recently, I've been going to Ezra Klein. Anyone read Ezra Klein? So you've probably seen this. But he goes back to Steve Bannon calling for an approach called muzzle velocity, which is to say so many shots fired, so many things happening so fast that it gives the sense of being in charge. It gives the sense that it's Trump's country now, his government, his will. And that's the point. That's why all this is happening. Except that none of this is actually the case, right? Just like it's not the case that Trump won the 2020 election. But the damage is done nonetheless by the activity of it. Doubt and distrust take root, and that's the point. So I promise you this isn't going to be a political talk. Do we have any Trump voters in the room? Maybe online? I mean, I would kind of hope, but this is going to be a cultural talk or a talk about living in the era we live in. But before I get there, this thing about kind of what Steve Bannon calls muzzle velocity, or this kind of shock and awe that we're living through in this first month of a new administration. It's an old business tactic. You know, we have a business guy in the White House. And I used to, when I was growing up, I'd go to hockey games. I grew up in LA, I'd go to Kings games. And if you showed up late after the first period had started, the scalpers on the corner would sell tickets, and you could get $50 tickets for $5 because they thought they wouldn't sell the ticket. So you can go to late to games, get a good ticket, go see the game. That was usually what I was up to. But a few times I had tickets, and no one was, we had an extra ticket, and we'd sell it to the scalper. And there's a trick scalpers will always do. Has anyone sold tickets this way? This is old. Now it's all digital. So you negotiate, You're not going to get the face value of it, but it's a little negotiating tactic. We used to have a lot more of this in the world. Every time I do it, the scalpers would take the ticket and start bending and folding them. You know, they'd kind of crinkle it up. They'd make the thing seem like it was worthless by kind of abusing it and ruffling it. Ah, this old thing, you don't believe in this anymore. I'll buy it for $1. And that's kind of what's going on. This democracy, this collective creation of a country we're in, don't worry about it. It's worthless now. Don't believe in it. I'm going to make it feel like it's not what it really is. And it's a really useful tactic because these words affect us. The sense of kind of demoralizing and undermining affects us. So if we don't see it as a tactic, we kind of can get hooked. And I think that's part of our practice in this, is seeing what's really happening. Okay, so I told you it's not a political talk, it's a cultural talk. And I think both Trump and Musk are very useful in understanding our culture right now. And it's a culture that includes a lot of kind of upside downness. We can't really figure out which way's up, which way's down, what's right, what's wrong. Hannah Arendt has been quoted a lot recently, and she says, when everybody lies to you, the consequence is not that you believe the lies, but rather that nobody believes anything any longer. This is because lies, by their very nature, have to be changed, and a lying government has constantly to rewrite its own history. On the receiving end, you get not only one lie, a lie which you could go on for the rest of your days with, but you get a great number of them, depending on how the political winds blow. And here's the important part. And a people that can no longer believe anything can no longer make up its mind. It is deprived not only of its capacity to act, but also its capacity to think and judge. And with such a people, you can then do what you please. So when everything and everyone is when everyone's lying about everything, there's no way to find our bearings. Power becomes the only truth. And so it's truth I want to talk about today, how we find it in our practice and how we find it with one another. So last thing about Trump and Elon Musk, I promise. Anyone think they're addicts? Anyone look at what's going on and think, well, that looks like addiction to me? What's the addiction to? It's addiction to attention. Drama, power, ketamine. We're allowed to make some jokes, and it's true. What might we call this from a dharmic perspective? Suffering. What else? Delusion, greed. What about addiction to the self? Could we call it that? I think all that's right. And yet we may call it this kind of pervasive addiction to self. That's right. Addiction to the ego. Yeah. And since we know this is true of others, we know it's also true of us. What we see in the world, this outer tangle, we know is also our inner tangle. And we know this maybe most strikingly from the Vimalakirti Sutra, where at the beginning, Manjushri and his company show up, and Vimalakirti's in bed, and he says, Manjushri, this body is impermanent, without constancy, without durability, without a self, ultimately empty. This is our teachings. Yet, he says, because all sentient beings are sick, I am sick. And if all sentient beings are freed from sickness, then my sickness will also disappear. So this truth of interdependence means we're wrapped up in each other's stories and each other's neuroses. And so the sickness of this moment has something to do with our own practice, our own lives. So a number of cultural critics that I read have put a simple name on this, which is the age of narcissism. And one in particular I want to talk about today, which is the psychiatrist at Stanford, Dr. Anna Lembke. Anyone know her? The addiction psychiatrist. She says, we're essentially struggling with endemic narcissism, where our culture is demanding that we focus on ourselves so much that what it's creating is the deep need to escape ourselves. So in her analysis, this escape comes in the form of addiction. Of course, she's an addiction specialist. Addiction to alcohol, addiction to Instagram, addiction to shopping, and just the story of the self, that addiction. And if we think the story of the self isn't a serious addiction, we just have to glance back for a moment at Trump and Elon Musk, who now both own their own media company that can broadcast the story of their self 24/7, okay? Continuous dopamine drip. So Lemke gives us 10 steps for understanding this kind of dilemma. The 10 steps sound a lot like the Eightfold Path, so we may know them. And she starts by saying, the relentless pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain leads to suffering. Recovery, she says, begins with abstinence. Abstinence, she then says, resets the brain's reward pathways, and with it, our capacity to take joy in simple things. This sounds a lot like Zazen to me. We go through our lives kind of avoiding things, attached to things. We become embroiled maybe in the small self, as Tals has reminded us. And then we sit down, we attend to the breath and the body, and we open up to a view that's much larger than our story of what's going on. Essentially, we abstain from feeding the small self or the ego or that addiction. So we can stand up from the cushion or come out of a week of sesshin and take pleasure in simple things, appreciate the simplicity of life and the connection of all things. This is where she begins, and then she kind of points 4, 5, 6, and 7 are about how to maintain and hold that kind of sense of simplicity and sobriety. And then step 8 is where I want to land today, which is, she says, radical honesty promotes awareness, enhances intimacy, and fosters a plenty mindset. So step 8 is radical honesty, engaging in radical honesty, which promotes awareness, enhances intimacy, and fosters a plenty mindset. So we have all this lying, a world that's topsy-turvy, black is white, white is black, and yet a reminder that our sobriety or our kind of awareness or being planted in the midst of our life is made of honesty. So what does that mean? Well, first, Lemke points out that this isn't easy, being honest. We must admit that telling the truth can be painful. We're wired, she says, from an early age to lie. Lies, she writes, arguably have some adaptive advantage when it comes to competing for scarce resources. But lying in a world of plenty leads to isolation, craving, and she calls it pathological overconsumption. So the sense that we continue to believe things are scarce even when we're okay, when we're safe. So I'm going to now transition. This is kind of an addiction doctor talking about addiction. We're going to come back to her and maybe a world where addiction is a useful lens. And I'm going to transition to the precepts. So which precept is not lying? I just put up, anyone? We have Jukai coming up. A lot of people sew in their robes. You've all been studying the precepts. 5. He knows the answer. We've been talking about it. 4. So the fourth grade precept, or fourth grade precept is often called. So this precept, not lying or speaking the truth without guilt or blame, has many layers to it. And as we know, all the other precepts are included within it. But its power lies not just in not causing problems for ourselves and others, but that it allows for an understanding of our own life and creates the possibility for real intimacy with ourselves and others. It's a measure of our willingness to transcend our self-obsession, our inherited narcissism. All of that and not lying. So this is what Rabbi Anderson has to say about it. He says, all speech based on self-concern is false or harmful speech. And speaking truth naturally arises from selflessness. When we are caught in self-protection and self-promotion, we cannot speak the truth. In the end, truth speaking is the only way out of the bondage of self-concern. In the end, he says, truth speaking is the only way out of the bondage of self-concern. Freedom from selfishness does not come from pretending that we are not selfish, he continues. It is realized through the complete study of our selfishness. Practicing no false speech helps to reveal our self-concern and thus liberate us from our self-concern right in the midst of it. That makes sense to people? So when we're in the throes of our narcissism, our self-concern, we actually can't speak truth. It's always some sort of hook. It's always some sort of creation of our ego in the world. But if we face that and kind of liberate ourselves from it, we can speak to the world as it is, or we can meet another. We can be with one who is not ourself, which is a neat and important trick. So at this point, it's my time to say my name is Kozan and I'm an addict. I am addicted to myself. Anyone know who started all his Dharma talks like that? Yeah, Roshi Bernie. So like with 12 steps, this is the first step in our practice. There's a thread of selfishness born of being human. So how do we show up to it is our question. Do we become a toy of it, of our ego, or can we include it in an identity that's much larger, that includes concern for others who we may never meet, concern for children not yet born, concern for the health of this earth that has given us life. And when we wake up to our interconnectedness, then we inevitably, in that waking up, burst through the barrier of this selfishness into a much wider, more intimate world. It's important to note that we don't do this alone. Honesty is infectious, just as dishonesty is infectious. So when I'm honest with you, you're more able to be honest with me. This isn't just about what we say, it's also about how we feel with one another. Does anyone know the marshmallow test? So I didn't know this, I knew the marshmallow test, but they did another test. There've been many variations on it. For those who don't know, this is a test with 3 to 5-year-olds. They're given a marshmallow, the proctor, the person doing the test, leaves the room for like 10 minutes, and they're told if they don't eat the marshmallow, they get 2 that they can eat. And it was early on, this has been problematized, but it was early on seen as kind of an indicator of future success on all sorts of levels: academic success, relational success, happiness. Do you have self-control when you're 3 to 5? And you have videos of kids kind of like doing everything, looking away, they're kind of playing with their fingers, they're doing everything not to eat the marshmallow. There's a variation on this test where before the marshmallow test is given, the person running the test comes in and says, I'm going to leave the room. If you ring this bell, I'll come back and see what's going on. Almost breaks my heart. It's so simple. Half the group, when the bell is rung, no one comes to check on them. They're given a lie, essentially. They're lied to. The other half, when the bell is rung, they do come. After this, they're given the marshmallow test. And those who were lied to score 4 times worse on the test than those who weren't lied to. So trust is shared, engendered, created, and it can be damaged and it can be built up. When people around us are reliable, tell us the truth, we begin to feel that the world is orderly, predictable, safe. Even in the midst of scarcity, we feel confident that things will turn out okay. Conversely, when people around us lie or don't keep their word, we begin to feel the world, as Hobbes put it, is nasty and brutish, in short. And we go into a competitive scarcity mindset, even in the midst of abundance. So in this way, the fourth precept is connected to the eighth. Anyone remember what the eighth precept is? I will not foster a mind of poverty in myself or other, not being stingy. So it reminds us that by fostering a mind of poverty in myself and others, or rather by not lying, I'm not fostering a mind of poverty. And this reminds us that our practice is not entirely our own. We wake up together. We must find trust within our own practice, and we foster it for and with one another. Dogen emphasizes this kind of trust and somehow does so in a exchange about national strife in his time. So this is at the end of Bendoa, which is the first fascicle in the Shobogenzo. And it's a beautiful fascicle. We'll study it, I believe, in the fall. And the second half of it is a question and answer between him and people there, his students. And one of his students, this is the last question, I think like the 18th, says the following. He says, our entire nation is foolish and narrow-minded, and we are deeply attached to visible merit and fond of worldly values. Sounds familiar? If such people do Zazen, can they realize Buddha Dharma? So this is his question to Dogen. Dogen says, what you say is correct. Among people in our own country, compassionate wisdom does not yet prevail, and their nature seems rather coarse. They easily pursue fame and gain, and it's difficult for them to be free from delusion. However, to enter the realization of Buddha Dharma, one does not need worldly wisdom. During the Buddha's time, one person attained the way by wearing the robe in jest. This person was deeply confused, but with the aid of genuine trust, they were able to be free from delusion. Another woman serving food to an ignorant old monk was enlightened. This did not depend on wisdom. It was only brought about by genuine trust. If you practice with genuine trust, you will attain the way, regardless of being sharp or dull, he says. So we can interpret this genuine trust as trust in the Dharma. But of course, these words are being spoken between teacher and student, practitioner and practitioner. Genuine trust is in the midst of the exchange. It's not some jewel that's only sewn in to one person's robe or the other. So even in Dogen's time, the nation was foolish, we learn from this, narrow-minded. How does he respond? By practicing trust, by embodying honesty. And this is, I think, or I suggest today, a genuine response to this cultural and political moment, a way of seeding sobriety in a world drunk on self. And to this end, there are two ways that we might practice honesty. The first is with ourself, and the second is with others. So sometimes we live in a story of the self that doesn't match up with reality. Reality is too harsh a light, and so we take the edge off, perhaps by claiming we won an election that our ego couldn't stand to have lost, or by bragging about being the best Diablo 4 gamer in the world. Did anyone see that? Yeah. So absurd as these examples might be, little autobiographical fibs can become seamless habits if we're not paying attention. This comes from Dr. Lemke too. So back when I worked in politics in New York, I co-founded a group that was trying to get money out of politics, out of elections. As you can tell, we were not successful. And it was during a point where the campaign had a lot of steam, and I wrote a draft of an op-ed that would be published in a bunch of national outlets. And my assistant at the time did the heavy lifting on all the kind of facts and research and kind of did this final edit that really made it sing. And really, we wrote the thing together. But I only put my name on it. Actually, I put the name of my co-founder on it too, who hadn't written a word. But that was kind of what you did in these political groups. You know, that someone else was the writer and so forth. But I felt weird about it in that moment. You know, I co-wrote it with someone, their name wasn't on it. And then to not feel weird about it, I just forgot that anyone else wrote it but me. My story was, no, I wrote this thing. So a month later, maybe two, we're at an office event and we're talking about it. And I'm talking about it as if I wrote it. And halfway through this conversation, I realized the person who wrote it with me is part of the conversation. They know that this is BS. And something about that moment of believing my lie as if it were true, and then noticing the absurdity of it, because it's staring me in the face, hit me like a ton of bricks. I thought, oh, I'm doing this all the time. These small lies that I come to believe, and that are very common in the political world, as you can imagine. So the psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott in the 60s introduced the concept of the false self, defined as a self-constructed persona in defense against intolerable external demands and stressors. Indulgence in the false self can lead to profound loneliness, he writes. There's no there. There's no substance. Back to Lemke, who says, single, simple truths about our day-to-day lives are like links in a chain that translate into truthful autobiographical narratives. Autobiographical narratives are an essential measure of lived time. The stories we narrate about our lives not only serve as a measure of our past, but can also shape our future behavior. In other words, how we tell our personal stories either increases our tolerance for truth or erodes it. And this is what's at stake with the stories we tell ourselves. When it comes to others, we know from studying the precepts, those of us who have, that right speech, the fourth precept of telling the truth, is not always, being honest is not always the paramount concern. Sometimes not causing harm takes precedent, right? So you live during the Third Reich, you are hiding a Jew in your attic, the Stasi come, you don't say, there's a Jew in my attic. Maybe you lie, because it's actually the right thing to do in that situation. And often we avoid subjects because it's not our story to tell, or there's ways in which just being ruthlessly honest isn't the best course of action. And yet, one important aspect of truthfulness that we often overlook is that sharing uncomfortable aspects of our lives is the substance of intimacy. We generally fear that being honest about certain things will turn others away, when in reality, it's the activity that lets others in. And it's this kind of honesty that she points to as the cure for the indifference that arises from the addiction to the self. In these upside-down times, we can practice acting upright as this kind of radical act. It's against the stream, you may say. And yet we have to be on the lookout about being smug about it. There's always a remainder. There's always something left out that connects us to the world, that connects us even to President Trump and Elon Musk. There's always our humanity and the kind of practice that we're showing up to. So to elucidate this, so we have the truth we tell ourselves, the truth we tell others, and we have a remainder. And sometimes we call the remainder our tail. Anyone know what their tail is? Can you see it? So there are many stories about our tail, but the one I like most was my Shuso koan, which is case 38 in the Mumonkan, the Gateless Gate. Case is very simple. Wutsu says, it's like a buffalo that passes through a lattice window. Its head, horns, and forelegs all make it through. Why can't its tail pass through as well? That's the whole case. So its head, horns, and forelegs pass through. Why can't its tail get through? So as we've said, we're always showing up to our selfishness, this tiny little tail. We can get our large horns of our arrogance through the window. We can get our big head of knowing through the window. We can even get our big cravings and aversions, those things that seem to define us. We know what it feels like to allow them to dissolve into silence. But then there's this tiny little tail, a thread of desire or of fear, a thread of our eternal humanity. Maybe the pride in being honest that undermines that same honesty, or the certainty that our truth is the whole truth rather than just part of it. Or the tiny morsels of desire or ego contortion that we hold on to or that continue even as everything's made it through, right? Making it through this lattice window into interbeing, into emptiness. And so when everything's made it through, still caught on the hinges and tripping us up is this tail. This tail connecting us in our fallibility, in our imperfection, to everything and everyone else. So there's a verse that goes with this koan. Passing through, falling into a ditch. Turning beyond, all is lost. This tiny little tail, what a wonderful thing it is. So now can you feel your tail? You sense it dancing back there? We have one more page, but I don't know if it's... So the tail reminds me of something Dogen says in Genjo Koan, which is when the Dharma does not fill your whole body and mind, you think it's already sufficient. When it's out there, something to be attained, you think it's enough. When the Dharma fills your body and mind, you understand something is missing. So since we're talking about right speech, I want to close with a reminder about the compassionate and intrinsic aspects of right speech, or the fourth precept. Dainin and Fushin gave us an understanding of these different lenses we use to understand the precepts. The kind of literal is maybe where we've been, a little bit in the realm of the compassionate. I want to close by just highlighting this compassionate or Mahayana view and the ultimate or intrinsic view, which is always included in our practice of not lying or of right speech. So the first is that right speech must be kind. The Buddha teaches this quite explicitly in his discourse on the Eightfold Path, but Dogen further encourages it when he says, ponder the fact that kind speech is not just praising or expressing the merit of others, but kind speech has the power to turn the destiny of a nation. It's not just nice, kind speech. It's potent, it's direct. It has the power to change the world. And right speech is always this kind of kind. So that's the compassionate view. The intrinsic view is that all speech is ultimately empty of right or wrong, or even empty of speech, we might say. Everything begins from silence, is shot through with silence, and returns to silence. This is the reality before we give it form, before we separate the world into mine and yours. It's the fundamental truth about who we are and how. This is the emptiness view. It's always a little contradictory, but the notion that right and wrong exist is already the dualistic view. So to express this, I want to share an interaction between Catherine Thanis and Suzuki Roshi that she writes about. She says, in a 1968 ceremony, I asked Suzuki Roshi, "Who are you?" He responded, "To whom are you asking?" I said, "To all of you." Suzuki Roshi responded, "Do you really understand all of me? All that you see and what you do not see? I am here, but before I am here, something you don't know exists. I am someone who exists here, who is speaking something, and I'm also someone who does not appear in this way. Before I say something, before I exist here, something is here with all beings. I am both someone who has form and color and someone who has no form, no color. And you are speaking to someone who has a body and mind." Do you really understand all of me, he says, all that you see and what you do not see? I am here, but before I am here, something you don't know exists. So many of us are still arriving from Sesshin, power of deep practice that we touch into, this self that we don't know, this holy other, this not knowing. And when we return to the marketplace as we're doing now, we can meet things as they are without so much resistance or fear. We have this underlying understanding that whatever we meet is entirely as it is. It's our life. At the same time, and in the same moment, we can appreciate the silence before and within each thing. We can appreciate that this life is much, much bigger than our story about it. And thus, there's less to get addicted to. As Suzuki says, before I say something, before I exist, something is here with all beings. So I think this is helpful in this cultural and political moment. We are fully with, and we also know what is before and within, what is arising. And it's maybe our time now to show up in that way to this moment and to each other. So that's all I got tonight. Thanks for your attention.
Creations are numberless, I vow to freedom. Delusions are inexhaustible, I
where I'd come up with a mic and say, thank you, Kozan, for your Dharma talk. And give some announcements. So just a couple announcements this week. Next week, Rebecca Solnit will be giving the Dharma talk, which is one reason I rewrote this from being a political Dharma talk to being one about the precepts, because I could never compete with Rebecca Solnit Dharma talk in this political moment. I'm really looking forward to it. Tonight, we're inviting people for dinner. We do ask that you sign up online. We have a spreadsheet. I don't know how on top of that we've been. So if you want to come to dinner tonight, just come join us. I think we have enough food for everyone. And next week, we begin Zen Circle, which begins with calligraphy and then goes into haiku the following weekend. I believe they're both full, but we have a waiting list. So if you're interested, you can sign up. And if you can't join in person, at least haiku will be online. I think that's it. Anything else going on?